This podcast is made possible by the listener members of Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nashvillager Podcast. It's October 29th, 2024. On this day in 1967, the world's first ever computer-to-computer connection was established. It was called ARPANET, the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. The main goal was to make it easier for cutting-edge researchers with defense contracts to work together on projects. It was also conceived of as a way to decentralize the communications network for the U.S. military. It was the Cold War, after all, and there was concern that without something like ARPANET, one Soviet missile strike on a command hub could cripple the nation's ability to mount a coordinated response. As you may have guessed, ARPANET was the direct precursor to the modern internet. And if you recall the time when political opponents accused Tennessee and Al Gore of claiming to have invented the internet, well, he did play a pretty important role. As a senator representing this state, one of Gore's pet issues was securing the funding to build the so-called information superhighway that expanded ARPANET into something we all use every day. He spearheaded a measure requiring the Reagan administration to make a major feasibility study of expanding computer networks. And then in 1991, he sponsored a bill that opened up the technology beyond defense use so that private computer networks could form for the purposes of information sharing and commerce. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. It really stands out to me that one of the early goals of the very first computer network was enhancing security. You know, that whole thing about decentralizing military communications. Because these days, so often it seems people find ways to use the internet to puncture security. Now, to be fair, there's a lot more legit, straightforward information sharing happening online than there is theft. It's easy to forget that because it's become so natural to watch a YouTube video, to pull up a restaurant review, to Google the answer to a question that many of us couldn't even estimate how many times a day we put the internet to work for us. The times when our identity is stolen, though, those stick out like crazy. And of course, those times should, because we stand to lose a lot when that happens. A few years ago, someone bought all the information necessary to take out lines of credit in my husband's name. Thank goodness they got sloppy quickly and set off red flags for the manager at the Cool Springs Lowe's. And a huge thank you to that manager who called my husband and asked if he really was trying to use his line of store credit to buy a huge pile of gift cards. Because of that, he was able to quickly find and cancel the other lines of credit the thief had already taken out in his name at multiple other stores around Brentwood and cancel the huge purchases that had immediately been made on those credit cards in his name. I mention that as a reminder that this is the kind of thing that's at stake when we hear about a big data breach. Files that include not just names and addresses, but also social security numbers are a prime target because having all of that together opens the door to particularly lucrative forms of identity theft, like credit fraud. Which is one reason why so many of Middle Tennessee's healthcare businesses and medical clinics are targeted. It's easy to avoid giving out your social security number to Old Navy, but your doctor probably asks to keep it on file. Your insurance company has it, too. And we're a hub for those kinds of firms. And on top of that, there's a thriving black market for personal health information. In fact, it can be even more valuable than that credit data. Earlier this year, WPLN health reporter Catherine Sweeney reported that roughly 20 Tennessee-based healthcare companies have reported data breaches in the last few years. When those attacks target providers, like the one on Murfreesboro Medical Clinic last June, those hacks can put everything at a standstill, including some kinds of patient care, as the providers lock down their networks and stop their computers from talking to each other. Ascension, the parent organization of the St. Thomas hospitals and clinics, suffered a ransomware attack in May. Some of their emergency rooms went on divert, which means ambulances were sent to other hospitals. Patient portals and electronic health records were down. And other functions that did keep operating, like imaging and testing, had delays as a result of the security lockdown that was necessary to respond to the attack. It's hard to say where these things will end up in terms of building protections against these kinds of crimes. In Tennessee, the legislative response this year was to protect the targeted companies from customer lawsuits. A law that passed in April limits the kind of class action lawsuits that can be filed. So now, if your information is stolen from a company's database, you can't sue over poor cybersecurity measures unless their security was so lacking that it counts as gross negligence or willful misconduct, which is a pretty high bar. That protects a lot of the companies that call our area home, but it doesn't do much for the individuals whose personal health or financial information is stolen and sold on the black market. Remember, those 20 attacks on Tennessee companies that I mentioned earlier? In all, those affected an estimated 14 million customers. Other states and the federal government have been moving the other direction, trying to craft measures that would hold companies more accountable for providing strong security against online theft. In just a few minutes, we'll hear how much creativity local theater companies have to use in finding places to rehearse and perform. That's coming up after the newscast.
Tennessee's legislature has passed a record-breaking number of anti-LGBTQ laws. I'm Miriam Yao, and as WPLN's Power and Equity reporter, I focus not only on how marginalized communities contend with those new laws, but how they come together in spite of them.
I think what gives me hope is that someone like you is covering this. Because if the overwhelming narrative is one of defeat, how can we have hope?
Listen here on 90.3 WPLN News.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. The leader of Tennessee's House is criticizing how two of his Republican colleagues are treating a volatile criminal investigation. House Speaker Cameron Sexton tells News Channel 5 that Representatives Bud Halsey and Monty Fritz chose the wrong path when they sent a letter to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. It threatened, quote, political fallout if the agency continues its probe into Millersville's police department. TBI is investigating possible misuse of sensitive law enforcement data. The House Speaker would not say whether there should be any consequences for the lawmakers, but he is saying there won't be political penalties for the TBI. State Democrats say the threatening letter does amount to a violation of State House ethics rules. The Tennessee Supreme Court has issued a ruling that First Amendment experts say is a blow to free speech. In a unanimous decision, the court determined that defendants who are targets of so-called SLAPP lawsuits are not entitled to have their litigation costs covered if the plaintiff dismisses the lawsuit at the last minute. SLAPP suits intend to intimidate or silence critics by burdening them with the costs of legal defense. The Supreme Court's decision stems from a case by a Shelbyville landowner who sued several people over what he considered libelous remarks on social media. The Tennessean reports the Supreme Court's ruling means that plaintiffs can continue litigation until the very last minute and then voluntarily drop the case, leaving defendants with potentially massive court fees. Free speech advocates say the decision will chill free speech, making the average person hesitant to speak out against a plaintiff. As the future of Nashville's transit system hangs in the balance, groups both for and against the referendum are making final efforts to persuade voters. WPLN's Cynthia Abrams looked at the committee's finance reports and says there's a big difference in their capacity to get messages to voters.
On the pro-transit side, they're leaning in hard on TV ads.
Nashville's transportation improvement plan is on the ballot. Vote for nearly 600 new smart traffic lights, upgrades to buses, and new sidewalks.
With more than $500,000 spent. Broadcast ads make up almost all of their reported spending. However, it isn't clear who made these donations, as their report doesn't say. The Tennessee Bureau of Ethics and Campaign Finance says that's a problem, and the state has requested these details and an amended report. Still, the group's donations totaled more than 8 times the amount the opposition had on hand. That group reported raising around $64,000 and still has some in the bank. The Committee to Stop an Unfair Tax has spent only a third of what they've raised on digital advertising and yard signs.
We're going to keep doing digital.
That's Emily Evans, one of the group's leaders.
You know, if we have enough money, we'll do some more mail.
That group has one person to thank for the bulk of their funds, Lee Beeman. The former car dealership magnate donated $50K, a move that's in line with his past donations against transit. These reports only show campaign finances from July through September, so as Election Day approaches, there could be another flurry of donations. Cynthia Abrams, WPLN News.
Nashville has a bumper crop coming of office space. That's amid ongoing uncertainty about how much demand there really is for this type of real estate. The Nashville Business Journal, citing the research firm JLL, reports the office vacancy rate is expected to rise above 20% next year. The reason for the increase stems from some high-profile companies like Asurion and AT&T in the Batman building moving out of portions of their spaces, while some new major projects like Nashville Yards will come online. Tennessee is home to the largest hospital operator in the country, HCA Healthcare, Inc. WPLN's health reporter Catherine Sweeney tells us business is booming for the company.
The Nashville-based hospital giant is worth more on the stock market now than it ever has been, according to Becker's Hospital Review. The price hit $410 per share on October 23rd. The company says a lot of that success comes from serving more patients. For example, most hospitals saw the number of surgeries they performed every year drop off in the pandemic, and it's been slow to recover. But HCA hospitals seem to be bouncing back.
The company has also bought 7 new hospitals over the past few years, meaning even more patients. A stadium concert in Charlotte raised over $24 million for hurricane recovery efforts in the Carolinas this weekend. Country stars Eric Church and Luke Combs, who are both based in Middle Tennessee and grew up in North Carolina, organized the star-studded event dubbed the Concert for Carolina. During the show, Church also announced that his charitable foundation is committed to building 100 homes in a county in the state's northwest corner that was devastated by the storm's flooding. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. The vast majority of Nashville's dozens of theater companies don't own spaces to rehearse or perform in. The theater community has to share just a few venues, which sometimes leaves companies scrambling. WPLN's Chard Aston talked to members of the theater community to find out how this came to be and what the potential solutions are.
Y'all ready? Get right into it.
Kenny Dozier has convened a group of actors in the basement of his house. Everyone is sitting around on couches in a warmly lit room he calls the man cave. On tonight's agenda is a cold read of a play called Brokology. A husband and wife disagree on what to tell their kids about Santa.
It ain't right, baby girl. My brothers and sisters and I were all raised to believe that mom and daddy worked hard to get us gifts, not some fat white man.
William, it's just for fun.
Come to think about it, unless we have dumb kids, I don't even think they're going for it.
Why?
Well, one, we live in the hood, crib neighborhood at that, and you see all these boys around here wearing nothing but blue. Santa comes through here in all that red, somebody's gonna shoot him, Jackie Slay, reindeer and all. Two,
Dozier is the founder and director of his own company, Kenny Playhouse Theater. It focuses on stories of the Black experience in the U.S. To find rehearsal spaces, he's had to be scrappy, sometimes working out of his house, sometimes negotiating with schools and churches.
I've been in cold places. I've been in dirty places. I've been in small places. I feel like sometimes I've been in closets. We've rehearsed outside before. We rehearsed around the Titan Stadium outside.
Dozier isn't alone. A survey from the Arts and Business Council found that nearly 2/3 of arts organizations aren't satisfied with the resources they have, and a third say lack of space is their number one concern. Right now, buying space isn't really an option. Isabel Tipton-Crispin, director of the Nashville Shakespeare Festival, told me even medium to large arts nonprofits can't keep up with our growing city's skyrocketing real estate prices. In an email, she wrote, quote, "When I look online or call realtors out of curiosity about space, the price is many times over what we could responsibly budget." And price isn't the only concern. Companies are looking for certain features that not every commercial building can offer. Drew Ogle directs the city's largest theater company, the Nashville Rep.
So if you think about the way a grocery store is built with a support beam every 12 feet, that would not be conducive to rehearsal space. And so things like warehouses and empty space like that could make a good fit.
The rep is currently looking for a permanent location for rehearsals. They do their performances at the Tennessee Performing Arts Center, TPAC. Renting space there is expensive, but
we're able to use their facilities, and they've got great staff, box office, backstage crew, and what have you. So in the end, it kind of balances out a little bit.
Smaller companies generally need a lower price than TPAC can offer. That means sharing just a few performance spaces in Nashville. Sean Witzel directs Destiny Theater Experience. He usually stages his shows at the Dark Horse, a popular theater venue on Charlotte Pike.
But if there's a time where I feel inspired to create something or do a show, and the Dark Horse isn't available, of course, I have to find another way to do it.
Still, Witzel thinks the owner of the Dark Horse really understands the theater community and tries to support its needs.
Shannon Wood and then her husband also, Peter Curlin. They've just been great with keeping the Dark Horse affordable for small companies that don't have a lot of funding. Oftentimes she comes to our shows. We know her outside of just theater. We have relationship with her in other ways.
In the absence of more money, that's the best way to make up for the lack of space. Relationships with venue owners and coordination with other theater companies. Dozier of Kenny Playhouse Theater thinks the local government should play a role in that relationship too, by building more theaters.
You know, you have schools that are out there that are not being utilized anymore. You know, you have a lot of opportunity to create that. And you have these, you know, in Atlanta they have places that are owned by the city, but they're theaters, you know, all on different sides of town. They're really, really nice.
Metro Parks does run Luby Theater and the Centennial Black Box, but the city hasn't announced plans to build any new theaters. There is another privately owned art space in the works. Shelby Commons is a collaboration between the Arts and Business Council and Friends of Shelby Park. It will include a rehearsal and a performance space. Meanwhile, in an unexpected twist, Dozier's company will soon be one of just a few in Nashville with its own space.
That's a miracle from God.
Last summer, Dozier was left in the lurch after the venue for his youth theater camp canceled on him. On short notice, he found a pastor who was enthusiastic about hosting the camp. And the pastor's church had an annex on the property they weren't using.
It's an older home, has a lot of character to it.
Dozier is already imagining the floor plan.
We're going to open it up and make the rooms where you can have rehearsals here, you can have a meeting here, you can have a class here.
In Nashville, there are dozens of other theater artists who have ambitions like this, if only they had the space. For now, though, the show must go on.
You looking rough. We can't be dancing cheek to cheek with scratchy face like that.
All right, fine, I'll shave.
Good.
Char Daston, WPLN News.
Thanks for listening to the Nash Villager podcast. We take this look at Nashville news every weekday. If you like it, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and tell a friend or give us a mention on your socials. It really helps get the word out. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can become a member at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.